Today we are talking about an opportunity. A player in the New Jersey Devils organization who may or may not be in a position to be moved. Latest reports say that he has not asked for a trade, but that doesn't change the ability for us to talk about him as a trade option. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are talking about New Jersey Devils defenseman Simon Nemec, and 8 trade destinations as posted by James Nichols on New Jersey Hockey Now. Now, of course, you know me. I'm a Canucks and I'm a Canadiens fan. So when I see an article that talks about a young NHL superstar to be, and an article that links that player to both of my favorite teams, you know that we gotta get into it here. So let's leave a link in the description to James Nichols' article. Of course, Nichols does stuff on the New Jersey beat. It's New Jersey Hockey Now, after all. He posted this article, Devils Trade Partners, 8 Potential Simon Nemec Destinations. Let's get into the context. Let's talk about why Nemec is on the block. Let's talk about what this guy's accomplished so far, and then get into the entire Montreal and Vancouver angle of it all. Simon Nemec, 22 years old, 6'1", 190, a right-handed defenseman drafted 2nd overall by the Devils. By now, as we've been making a whole bunch of videos about this literally over the past 4 years, the Devils took Nemec at 2nd because they didn't need a center. Shane Wright dropped to 4, Logan Cooley dropped to 3, Slav and Nemec went 1 and 2, the first and potentially only time Slovakia would have seen 2 guys get taken at the top of the NHL draft. Hey, don't shoot the messenger. If Slovakia produces more number 1 overall caliber talents over the next few years, then I think that'd be great for the game. But Nemec was a super stud prospect that a lot of folks were saying had top 2 potential. So far in New Jersey, he's been all right. He scored 26 points in 68 games this previous season, which was an improvement over his first full year in the National Hockey League. Heck, I don't even think I could say that. He hasn't played a full 82-game season yet. This was the first season where he just didn't spend any time in the AHL. But Nemec is a guy who is playing behind some of the more important Devils defensemen. And at 22 years old, and with all this potential, you can say there's a reasonable way to think about Nemec and his future being somewhere else other than New Jersey. Nichols goes out there and writes in his article, just because Simon Nemec didn't ask the Devils to be traded, that doesn't mean he won't be. In fact, the Devils might have to move a defenseman. It's plausible that one of Nemec or Dougie Hamilton are moved this summer, given the abundance on the blue line, Hamilton's in-season drama, and a potential return for the 22-year-old Nemec. Plus, New Jersey has a clear need up front. There will be no shortage of suitors for the Devils if it is, in fact, Nemec that they try to move. Who doesn't want a 22-year-old defenseman who was a former 2nd overall pick who broke out for 11 goals in his 2nd full season in the league? Now, there are 8 destinations. The Sharks are listed here, so are the St. Louis Blues, the Canadiens, the Predators, the Kraken, the Maple Leafs, and the Vancouver Canucks, plus the Minnesota Wild. Of course, having a Nemec for Quinn Hughes trade would be so funny, but I do not want to talk about that right now. Let's focus on my 2 favorite teams in Montreal and in Vancouver and dive into the scoop that Nichols writes for both of these franchises. The Montreal Canadiens one is hard to predict, according to Nichols, but one thing is for sure. Juraj Slafkovsky would undoubtedly vouch for Nemec on his behalf. The Canadiens are on quite the run. They're amid the Eastern Conference Finals, despite trailing 3-1 to Carolina. The right side of their blue line doesn't look too bad either, with Noah Dobson, Lane Hutson, and Alexandre Carrier. However, Hutson is a lefty. He's made do just fine to this point, but would perhaps be that much more effective on his natural side. Montreal doesn't have a ton of cap space on July 1st, with $9.1 million ready to spend. They also have several RFAs to sign, such as Arber Xhekaj, Bolduc, and Doc. Yet, there is a potential RFA swap here that could make both sides happy. Now, I don't know what Nichols is implying when he says that, but when you think about the RFAs, is he suggesting a Nemec trade for one of those guys that has RFA status in Montreal's organization? Is he implying a Bolduc plus something trade could be done for Simon Nemec? If that's the case, then okay, maybe it would be a little bit cautious to navigate that, but if the Montreal Canadiens can add a really nice young right-handed defenseman that is buddies with Juraj Slafkovsky and a guy that would probably bring Montreal to the forefront of all Slovak hockey discourse, then I kind of like the sound of that. In fact, if you just replaced a David Reinbacher with a Simon Nemec, I think that's a pretty good idea too, although it's already reported that New Jersey doesn't need any more defensemen. If the Montreal Canadiens wanted to part with, let's say, a Doc or something for a Simon Nemec, I'd think that that sort of a hockey trade makes sense in theory, but maybe Nemec has a tad more value than Doc does. It's just, if you need to add a sweetener, you need to add a pick or something, I do think the Montreal Canadiens could stand to use that. I also do question whether or not Montreal even needs another right-handed defenseman, because this was always an issue for many years, that they had too many guys that were available and that could have been used. Now, they're kind of rounding it up with this roster here. Hudson's a lock, Dobson's a lock, Gooley is a lock, and Matheson, because of his contract, ended up becoming a lock as well. But then, you have to question, is there room for another one? And is Simon Nemec a guy that's worth taking that chance on? Furthermore, we have a conversation on the Vancouver Canucks that is also written about here towards the bottom of the article. Let's talk about what Nichols writes for Vancouver. Is there any doubt the Canucks want to tear it down to the studs? They seem destined to after ranking 32nd in the league in 25-26. Vancouver kickstarted their rebuild by trading their franchise defenseman Quinn Hughes in exchange for several future pieces in Rossi, Buium, and Ogren, plus a first in 2026. Yet, if the Canucks want to expedite their rebuild, they undoubtedly need to do so by building out their blue line. A long-term Buium and Nemec pairing should be attractive to new Canucks GM Ryan Johnson. Perhaps a forward in return who is still finding his way similar to Nemec, like Liam Ogren, makes sense in return. Now I'll just say this right here. Liam Ogren displayed really good skill with the Vancouver Canucks this most previous season. I understand the idea that Nichols is writing about. Oh, let's say Liam Ogren is a guy who's struggling, quote unquote. He only had 18 points in 51 Vancouver Canucks games. That's a guy who could stand to use a change of scenery. But I'll tell you this right here. Liam Ogren was unfortunately one of the most effective players the Canucks had this season. And I say unfortunately because, yeah, that stat line doesn't really stand out to you that much, and it also is an indicator as to where the Canucks were quality-wise on the ice. When Liam Ogren is one of your most effective players when it comes to actually driving play, playing with pace, and for some reason, scoring shootout goals, it really illustrates how bad of a team you have become, and the quality of play that is not present in the remaining forwards. Liam Ogren is a really nice middle six option for Vancouver that's young. He's going to get better as his career goes on, hopefully as the team gets better and he improves those connections with these other Swedes. Maybe that allows Liam Ogren to become, let's say, a Juraj Slafkovsky light, if we're just using that example. Or maybe he becomes a Jake DeBrusk, something like that. That's a pretty reasonable get as an extra throw-in piece in a Quinn Hughes trade. The Canucks probably are not interested in trading away Ogren for Simon Nemec, even though you could say the point production actually does favor Nemec. He had 26 points in 68 games. Ogren had the 18 points in 51 games. For Nemec, though, I do think the Vancouver Canucks would probably think it's a good idea to at least check in on this guy, see what kind of a price it would cost to get him. Although I do wonder if the Canucks instead were aiming for a right-handed defenseman who is young, maybe they just draft Chase Reed at the draft instead of making a trade for Nemec. I don't know. Or they get one of these guys to replace Filip Hronek, whom they'll eventually trade to San Jose for the second overall pick. Who really knows? There is, of course, another video to make about that. We'll talk about that later in today's show. For now, though, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about James Nichols and his commentary on the Simon Nemec trade situation? Do you think a trade to Montreal makes sense? Do you think a trade to Vancouver makes sense? What is the package for either of these teams? Let me know in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.